Coming up in today's episode, we are celebrating the 100th episode of the Aspiring Psychologist Podcast. We're looking at some of my favourite memories, as well as some of the things that didn't run quite so smoothly, as well as thinking about the future of the podcast. Thank you so much for being a loyal listener. Please do tell your friends about us, and I hope you enjoy this episode.
If you're looking to become a psychologist, then let this be your guide. With this podcast at your side, you'll be on your way to being qualified. It's the Aspiring Psychologist Podcast with Dr. Marianne, Trent.
Hi, welcome along to the Aspiring Psychologist Podcast. I am Dr. Marianne Trent and I'm a qualified clinical psychologist. You join me on what is a very monumental episode. This is episode 100. And I was just doing a few calculations that I realised that when this episode is going live, which will be the 6th of November, 2023, that will be 23 months since I recorded the first episodes, and they landed on Christmas Eve 2021. So we've packed quite a lot in over the last 100 episodes. And I just wanted to say a big thank you. I wanted to use today to think with you about the future of the podcast, to think with you about some of my highlights, to think with you about some of the things that are coming up, but also, of course, to weave in some useful and interesting nuggets for your own reflection, for your own growth. So it has felt like so long since it's just been a solo episode, but today is exactly what that is. And of course, I think that's happened because over the summer, I had loads of great guests that I wanted to speak to, but recording with them is quite tricky when I've got a house full of noisy children. So I scheduled all of those in for September and October, which means that I've had loads of great guests for you, but I haven't seen you one-to-one for a while, other than the Galway episode. But that didn't really count because that was lots of fun and games and people that I met along the way as well. So, given that today is the 6th of November, if you are listening to this on the day that it's released, then tomorrow, Tuesday, the 7th of November, is the third and final compassionate Q&A for the application season. So, of course, in psychology, we have those two quite distinct seasons. We've got the application season and the interview season, and I do the free Q&As to support both of those. And then, of course, the other season is out to fallow, over the summer, where you rest and recharge. And I try to leave you to your own devices then, apart from obviously listening to the podcast. So, you can watch live. But that will also be available as a replay on Tuesday the 7th. From Tuesday the 7th, you can watch it on replay by going to my YouTube, Dr. Marianne Trent. Please do subscribe whilst you're there, like a few pieces of content, maybe chuck me in a few comments, and share any useful content with your friends too. That would be marvellous. But you can also join me live on the night. You can join me from LinkedIn. You can join me from YouTube, from my Facebook page, which is Dr. Marianne Trent, from X, formerly known as Twitter, Dr. Marianne Trent. Although if you're joining me from Twitter, I don't believe I can see your comments as you make them live. So you may want to pick one of the other platforms. And if I can make it work on the evening, I will try to live stream from Instagram using my phone as well. If you've got any questions for me in advance, look out for the events that will be created on those platforms within 7 days before the event, because it doesn't let you schedule it before that, unfortunately. So there should be events that you can duck into right now and ask any questions in advance. Otherwise, just rock up and ask me your questions on the day. What sometimes helps is if you want me to know who you are and to use your name, if you go along to StreamYard.com either /Facebook or /LinkedIn. Then you can give it your permissions so that I can see your name. Gotta love a bit of GDPR, haven't you? It will also be streamed live via my Facebook group, which is the Aspiring Psychologist Community with Dr. Marianne Trent. And of course, it will also be live streamed to my members in the Aspiring Psychologist membership, which you can join by clicking on the link in my bio on any of my social media platforms, or by checking out the description or the show notes, depending on how you are watching or listening to this episode. So one suggestion that I'd had for my very special 100th episode was to include more bloopers, some of the bits that don't go right. And yeah, I guess this might be a good chance to explain that recently, in the last couple of months, I have outsourced my production of the podcast because it was taking up quite a lot of my time. So I think until around episode 8, mid-80s, something like that, I edited every single episode myself. So I've learned a lot about video and sound production over these last 2 years, but it's not my forte, you know? So I did outsource those. But it does mean that the bloopers, which I'd started doing, are now not happening because I don't get to see the bloopers anymore. Believe me, there's quite a few of them as I fluff up what I'm saying. But we don't have the bloopers show reels anymore, which is a real shame. But if there's any way we can bring them back in future, we will do. There was also another suggestion about interviewing people who'd been successful in the membership, which I love as an idea. I might absolutely do that in future, thinking about what people have found helpful, because I know it's a tricky thing to begin to imagine how helpful it might be. So I will definitely add that to the research list for a future episode. I wanted to use some of today's episode to tell you what it's meant to me and to share my gratitude to you, my dear listeners, or my dear watchers, if you're watching on YouTube, because it's felt like a really lovely community to be part of. I still am genuinely kind of perplexed and bemused when people tell me how helpful they find it and how nice it is to be able to tune in to someone either chatting to themselves about psychology or talking to other similarly passionate people about their journeys and the things that they are doing in the world of qualified or aspiring psychology. You won't have met him yet, but we've got an episode with a lovely guy coming up quite soon called Matthew. I could have spoken to him all day, but he's messaged me several times just to say how much he enjoyed what we did and how, how helpful he'd found it, how interesting he found it, and, how you mentioned during the chat, like he really likes the podcast, like he really finds it useful. And it's kind of what I like is it becomes part of people's fabric of their week. So because it's always out at 6 a.m. on a Monday, although I am playing around with that a little bit with YouTube. As I record this, I did play around with releasing episode 98 with Jonathan Paddy. I did play around with releasing that early on a Sunday afternoon. So if you like a little early look, do check out Dr. Marianne Trent on YouTube for a little sneak peek at the episode. It's not a sneak peek, it's the whole thing. But it's another way to get your psychology early. So if Sundays work better for you than Mondays as a release date, there's potentially an option there if I do continue to do that. But yeah, I love hearing your feedback. I love it when people leave me reviews, which you can do on Spotify or Apple. So please do that if you've got a spare moment. You don't even have to leave a full review. Certainly on Apple Podcast, you can just do a rating. But if you've got a minute more, please do leave me a review. If you are on Apple Podcasts, go to the podcast app, find the Aspiring Psychologist podcast, then click Go to Show. And then if you scroll down past about the first 5 or 6 episodes that will come up for you, you will then get to a section for rating and reviews. And once you've just clicked your, hopefully, 5-star review, you can then write a review. That would be so gratefully received. What do you need to be able to be a guest on the podcast? Well, an interesting story helps, but in terms of tech, It's helpful if you've got some sort of separate headphones and a mic, but you absolutely can use AirPods or a similar brand as well, because that helps cut down any audio noise. So I tend to mute myself when I'm not speaking. So I'm constantly like pressing buttons to allow me to speak, which does, of course, mean there's quite regularly a time where I'm talking and I've forgotten to unmute myself. It's just the modern complexities of using Zoom and Teams and stuff, isn't it? I do record on a platform called StreamYard, though, which is really very good. I do think it's a good platform. If you wanted to look into that yourself, there's a link in the show notes. So things do not always run smoothly in the life of a podcaster. I remember one time I accidentally deleted or hid the entire back catalogue of my podcast. That was a little bit panicked, but I did manage to find what I'd done with it again, which was a relief. I'd accidentally, I think, hidden it into another folder. So and since then, I've been backing it up as well, just in case. Sound has probably been the biggest bugbear. We also changed from being an MP3 only podcast to being a YouTube video content podcast as well. We've tried to kind of roll with the changes and get a bit of B-roll in there. But yeah, sound has not always been our friend. I think hopefully we've generally stumbled across a mic solution that works well for me as the host, but sometimes the sound for guests just hasn't worked. And even myself with this podcast setup, sometimes the sound has not been ideal. So I'm really sorry. But thank you for carrying on listening. Yeah, sometimes there's short notice cancellations because that is life, isn't it? But generally speaking, things have run pretty smoothly. So let me guide you through what being the host of the Aspiring Psychologist podcast looks like. So in terms of recordings, I usually record these either on a Monday morning or on a Friday morning. Although today is a Monday afternoon because I was already recording one this morning. And I do have to keep some of my Monday free to be able to prepare brilliant content for the people in the Aspiring Psychologist podcast. So I do sometimes keep the whole Monday free, but I use Monday sessions as a backup for people who aren't free on a Friday session to record. How do I find the guests? So if you are a long-term listener, you will know that I often hang out on LinkedIn. And as part of some of the interesting conversations I have on LinkedIn, if I think it would make an interesting episode, I do sometimes just say, how would you fancy coming on to discuss this as an episode on the Aspiring Psychologist podcast? Some people run a mile, but most do say, gosh, that would be amazing. Thank you. I'm very excited. Once it's in the can, so to speak, I download it and I create the little the moving graphic that you will see that appears on YouTube, which also acts as the thumbnail for YouTube as well. And yeah, I guess I'm trying to learn quite a lot. So as I've gone along, I've realized that you don't need to call it the title of the podcast in every episode, nor do I need to say what episode it is on the description. Instead, I should try and use as kind of a clickbaity title as possible, stuff that people might actually be searching for or Googling potentially. So that's what I try to do. When I've got that ready and when I've got any social links that I need to share for any guests, then I send that to my editor. It would be really good if, in theory, we can get a little bit ahead again, because sometimes, certainly when I was editing myself, sometimes I was only getting it finished on Sunday and then having to get it transcribed and do the show notes. Sometimes it's been quite last minute, which is quite stressful. But we're trying to move just so we're slightly further ahead. When I had a lovely aspiring psychologist helping me, she was able to help me get so that we were like 3 or 4 episodes scheduled in advance. And that last happened probably, well, we did it over the summer with the Summer Soundbite series. But yeah, full length episodes were scheduled over last summer. And then she went off traveling and we never quite recovered. But she's doing wonderful things now. And yeah, I think she liked working with me as well. So yeah, we get that back. I get it transcribed, and then someone helps me to create the show notes, because that was a bit of the process that I didn't really enjoy, which basically, if you've never checked out the show notes, do it now. Why not? Go along to the show, and then for each episode there is show notes, which will give you kind of the overview of what's in the episode. You can also look at the transcript for each episode, should you ever want to. And then, the main chunks, if you just want to kind of skim read, you can see what topics are discussed at roughly what minutes. So that's what the show notes are. We get a snippet or a reel created as part of the edit. And then that goes up, when I remember, onto TikTok, when I remember, onto YouTube Shorts, but regularly each week my virtual assistant helps me to schedule it up on Instagram, because my scheduling tool does not seem to like me. I put in all the effort to get it scheduled and it just doesn't happen. It used to, but I don't know, I seem to have lost my own recording privileges. I do not know why. So let's just take a little break here when you can hear about a little booksy wooksy, and I'll be back along very soon.
If you're looking to become a psychologist, then let this be your guide, filled with lessons and experience that will help you get qualified. So come and take a look. It's right here in this book. It's the Clinical Psychologist Collective. It's the Clinical Psychologist Collective.
How lovely it is to hear that again. It's been a while since we've heard the jingles for the books, because I don't tend to play those in the joint episodes, because it would be weird if suddenly in the middle of the conversation I just cut to the lovely jingle guys singing. So by the time you hear this episode, the world will know whether the Aspiring Psychologist Podcast won an award at the Independent Podcaster Awards. So we were up for 3 different categories, one of which was Best Jingle. Having listened to the others, I do think it is the best. So I do hope that we may win an award for one of the categories. But unfortunately, I'm not free to go to the awards evening in London. I would have really fancied that because it sounded quite swanky. But yeah, I'm not free to go. So I guess I'll find out retrospectively if I'm a winner. How cool would it be to be able to say award-winning podcast? So that's something exciting. Other things that have happened that are exciting is, I think, probably mainly because of the podcast, but also to do with the Aspiring Psychologist Collective book and the Clinical Psychologist Collective book, along with the free Compassionate Q&A series. I've been invited to do some psychology keynotes. So by the time you listen to this, so if you're listening to it on the day it's released, the 6th of November, that is the day when I'm going live to the British Psychological Society's Careers Festival conference as their opening keynote speaker, which is very exciting. So yeah, how cool is that actually? That's happening on the 100th episode celebration. So that's cool too. And then of course I was invited to speak for the Irish Psychological Society as well. If you think that you'd like to hear me speak at one of your upcoming events, please do get in contact with me. In terms of some of my favourite episodes of the podcast, so I know it's fresh in my memory, but I did just have a ball putting together the Galway one. It gave me quite the focus when I was spending time by myself to record and speak to myself. I think one of the strongest episodes is the one where I'm looking at helping you to revise and prepare better for interviews and exams. I really, really enjoyed that one. I also really enjoyed, so many of them. It's hard to pick between your babies, isn't it? But I really enjoyed talking with Alicia Hussein about her values and as being a Muslim. It was a lot of fun to talk with Dr. Deborah Kingston. It's just It just makes me smile. We were talking about working in forensic settings, being a slightly older applicant, as well as I think we did some neurodevelopmental type stuff as well. Had a real giggle when I met with Ian Dempsey to talk about finances, and he has been invited back on. In fact, I saw him this morning, and because there was a special request to get Ian back, so you'll be able to hear him in the new year because we decided that's probably a good time to start thinking about finances again. And it was, of course, a complete honour and a privilege. Do you remember when I was so nervous and intimidated that you could hear that I sounded a bit wobbly when I spoke with Dr. Lucy Johnston all about formulation and the power threat meaning framework? So, it's hard to pick your favourites out of 100 now, isn't it? But I would love to know what your favourite episodes have been, what has resonated with you most, or, what's made you smile, what's made you pick up your pen and get reflecting, or what's shaped, what you've written on your form, or the confidence that you've been able to bring to clinical experiences with your clients, or even with supervision for that matter. I think the boundary setting episode, which is episode 8, is really, really solid. All of those early ones as well are just really key foundations, really, for, working in psychology. And what's going to happen in future? So, yeah, given that I've already told you I've recorded stuff that's, taking us up to the new year and beyond, we're not stopping anytime soon. There are no plans to end. I am going to keep doing this, keep inviting really interesting guests for you to learn, for us to shape together, for us to grow. I really hope that I was about to say this time next year, but it won't be this time next year, because one a week is going to be almost 2 years' time. We'll be celebrating 200 episodes. I can't quite begin to imagine what that might look like. But of course, I guess it's also, I should say, that it's this podcast that got me the Channel 5 gig for inheritance disputes. So this podcast is how they found me. Another beautiful benefit of the podcast, which I most definitely did not see coming when I started it. So yeah, I shall be carrying on. It is quite an expensive process for me, with all of the people that I've got helping me with the podcast. So if you did want to buy me a cup of tea to say thank you and to help cover my costs, you can do that either directly from the Captivate platform or by clicking my Linktree link on any of my socials. And just a cup of tea would be absolutely delightful. Because as you guys know, I do enjoy a cup of herbal tea. Cheers. So thank you, dear listener, for showing up, for consistently giving me my ratings figures that I check in at. I can see even today, it's just a few hours since the podcast episode has dropped. Already I can see that we've had 95 unique listeners today, and that in total 111 episodes have been downloaded. So that is pretty good for the first hours of a podcast episode. Let's keep doing what we do, but I want this also to be a bottom-up process. So if there's something you would like to see, or someone you'd like me to interview for the podcast, do let me know. And if you can help me by introducing me to those people, that would be marvelous as well. So yeah, come and follow me on socials. Come and connect with me. Please do leave those reviews. Do consider coming along to my world, being part of the Aspiring Psychologist membership, and let me really help support you on your journey in this wonderful career that I feel so blessed and privileged to be able to say is mine, and yours, and I really try to keep this as generic as possible so that it's not just clinical psychology, but of course there may be a slight bias towards the old clinical psychology. But if there's another discipline that you would like to hear me interview, please do let me know. Thank you from the bottom of my heart. And I'll look forward to the next 100 episodes and beyond. Thank you so much. Take care.
If you're looking to become a psychologist, then let this be your guide. With this podcast at your side, you'll be on your way to being qualified. It's the Aspiring Psychologist Podcast with Dr. Marianne.